Welcome to Introduction to Tax Resolution. This is part 2 of a 2-part series. If you haven't attended part 1, don't worry, continue on through this, but we'd highly encourage you to go back where we cover some other exciting things. In this course, we're going to be talking about specifically understanding the structure of the IRS and, very importantly, understanding taxpayer rights, the Taxpayer Bill of Rights specifically, as well as what they call the IRS 10 deadly sins. That's actually what it's referred to as well as what your best practices should be as a representative. So we're going to dive into these various aspects and help you to really understand this world of resolution and how you fit into it. So understanding the IRS a little bit, here you are, you're ready to go ahead and jump into being a representative. And you know that most casework generally is in 2 areas. It's exam, it's collections. That's kind of where we get the majority of a lot of our casework. But we have to stop and understand a little bit of how the IRS is organized, because that's going to help us to really interface with them and work with the taxpayer resolving their issue. We know the IRS falls generically under the Department of Treasury. They have a pretty big duty. They have the purpose, they're organized to carry out the responsibilities, I have the hiccups there, under Code 7801 of the Internal Revenue Code. The Secretary has full authority to administer and enforce those laws, including the power to create an agency to enforce those laws. So this kind of goes back to the very nuts and bolts. This kind of, I guess, goes against those that say that no, there's no authority of the IRS. But here's, if we just kind of look at the underlying structure, it's building blocks, basically. They were created for this purpose. Now, if we look at like filling those roles, there's only 2 appointed positions, appointed by the President and confirmed by the Senate. They happen to be the Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service. That is authority granted under Section 7803. They serve as the head of the IRS, and they have a renewable 5-year term. So they're not in there, for life. They can be renewed, but they have a 5-year term. There's also Chief Counsel. Their job is to advise the IRS on legal matters, including interpreting or enforcing tax laws. So that's just kind of like at the highest level. There's only 2 appointed positions. And if we look at, okay, how does this whole organizational structure and staffing thing work? What are all these different offices? That's exactly what we're going to get into here next. So if we look at their national headquarters of the IRS, they are located in Washington, D.C., and they have, I listed here what they have listed as their mission on the website. But basically, they're supposed to they have a big job, help to enforce the tax laws, because Congress passes tax laws. They require taxpayers to comply, and the taxpayer is supposed to try to understand and meet their obligations, which is definitely difficult, but the IRS role is to help the large majority of these taxpayers with that law and try to ensure the minority who are unwilling to comply also pay their fair share. So that's kind of, like you can say, like the big overriding mission. They do have 9 main regional offices, or they're sometimes referred to as campuses. Depending where you're at in the country or your taxpayer is located, you would probably see already in this list one that may be familiar to you. I'm located in Colorado. We're often dealing with Ogden, Utah, but depending where you're at, one of these may be a familiar campus to you. So these are the service centers where they're located. They also have special roles that we're going to talk about, what some of these service centers do within the organizational structure of everything. They have 4 main operating divisions now. Now, they've gone through different sort of reorganizations over the past number of years, but this is kind of where they're at right now. They have 4 main operating divisions. One of them is what they call the Wage and Investment, or referred to as W&I division. What they are to do is to deal primarily with individuals. These individuals mostly pay their taxes through withholdings. A lot of them work as an employee. More than half of this segment will prepare their own returns quite often. Interact with the IRS maybe only once a year, and many of them even receive refunds. So this is kind of their target audience, you can say, of the Wage and Investment division. They're trying to manage this demand for, service and the increasing demand for electronic products and services and work. This is their kind of the goal of this division. We have another division called the Small Business Self-Employed. So the Small Business Self-Employed division, they're to help like the next segment, that small business owner or self-employed taxpayer, understand and meet their obligations. And some of their priorities are going to try to address the tax gap and try to fix the underreporting or underpaying issue. But their business profile, who are they dealing with primarily? They're dealing with those who might have a Schedule C or E for rentals, maybe a farm, They even deal with those who have a 2106. Now, that we know has changed after 2018, but this is some of their segment. They may deal with employment or excise or estate, gift tax. That's all within the world of the small business self-employed as well. But what about even partnerships, corporations, S corporations? They even have that they're tasked with. But the trick is it has to be a business with assets less than $10 million. So any business that falls within that category, this is a pretty big realm of who they're dealing with. In fact, the numbers, they approximately have 57 million taxpayers that they serve within this segment, with 41 million of them self-employed. And all these are businesses with, assets less than $10 million. And they deal with employment and excise and estate, a gift, all these different areas. Quite often you'll be dealing with the SBSE. So if you hear that term, SBSE, they're talking about the Small Business Self-Employed Division. Now you have an idea, oh yeah, I totally know who that is and what I'm dealing with now. You may not have this opportunity unless you have really big taxpayers, but it's good to know that it exists. It's a large business and international, the LB&I. They really haven't specifically defined or published any mission that I could find, but they think the bigger. They serve corporations, some maybe subchapter S corporations or partnerships, but these are the big guys. They have assets greater than $10 million. They typically employ a large number of employees, and they deal with complicated issues involving tax law or accounting principles. So these folks may conduct business in an expanding global environment. This is a more complex area. This is the segment or the target segment of the LB&I division. The last or the fourth operating division is the area called the tax-exempt and government entity. So who do they serve? They are going to serve small local community organizations or nonprofits, political organizations, municipalities like city governments, for example, major universities, large pension funds, state governments, these that have maybe complex tax-exempt bond transactions. They have highly specialized provisions of tax law, and they're not really designed to generate revenue, but just to ensure these particular entities fulfill their policy goals that their tax exemption was designed to achieve. Their job is to try to just keep them in compliance. So it's four main operating divisions. Depending who your taxpayer is going to depend on which division you're going to be working with. Wage and investment, SBSE, all these are going to kind of guide what division you're working with. If we look at other types if we talk just the organizational overview of the IRS itself, they have other types of offices. They have the Office of Chief Counsel. Their job is to provide legal guidance. Now, the Office of Chief Counsel is the one that's appointed by the president, and they, have a different role, but they're like the chief legal advisor to the IRS commissioner. They interpret and administer, help to enforce those laws, and provide guidance to the IRS and even to taxpayers. That's within their wheelhouse, their role. There's a whole different area called the Taxpayer Advocate Service. Now, this is to be an independent organization within the IRS. They are actually created by Congress. They're to help taxpayers resolve problems where they're kind of stuck. They look at systemic problems. Is this a problem across the board within all the IRS? And they recommend back to Congress, here's issues we're finding, and recommend fixes to prevent those problems in the future. So if we look at that and say, who is eligible? What are these taxpayers that are actually eligible to be in the Taxpayer Advocate Service? Those experiencing economic harm or significant cost. Well, what does that mean? If there's an immediate threat of an adverse action or even cost to them, like including fees for professional representation, the fees to hire you to help them, if they have a particular economic harm, they could be possibly in the Taxpayer Advocate Service arena. Those who experience a delay of more than 30 days to resolve their tax issue. So they, like in one case that I'm working right now, we've been waiting months and months and trying to go through the proper channels, and it's just not happening. So if they haven't received a response or resolution by the date promised, that is another area that the taxpayer advocate where they're supposed to step in and help. The service is free and confidential, and it basically meets those taxpayer needs for not only individuals but businesses that are stuck in this arena. So there's another couple areas of the organization of the IRS you can consider. Other offices, and this is something you may not know exists, and while we're touching all these different little arenas, is they have an Office of Systemic Advocacy. This is actually like a subset or part of the taxpayer advocate system but they work to resolve large-scale problems. They actually have I believe it's a computer system. It's called the SAMS. It's a Systemic Advocacy Management System, or SAMS, much easier to say, certainly. So they have ways that they try to track all this. They have a taxpayer advocacy panel. This allows taxpayers actually that opportunity to provide direct input. There are citizen volunteers that listen to taxpayers and identify these issues and make suggestions on how to improve IRS and customer service. So these are all different little arenas that exist within the IRS realm. There is a low-income tax clinic, and this is also independent from the IRS, that they may serve individuals who have income below a certain threshold, they need to solve a tax problem, or maybe they have limited English proficiency or as a second language. They can provide professional representation. They may be able to help with, let's say, audits or appeals, tax collections, or other issues for free or a small fee. So these are all different areas that exist within, if we talk about the overall giant organization. Other offices that you may hear of or encounter is criminal investigation arena. Their job is to investigate potential criminal violations of the code and related financial crimes. Now, it's comprised of nearly 3,500 employees worldwide. Now, of that, about 2,500 of them are special agents. Their investigative jurisdiction includes tax, but not only tax, money laundering, and Bank Secrecy Act laws are all within their jurisdiction as well. Their job is to try to provide confidence in the tax system, because they're going to go after those who are the bad players, so that everybody else is. Our tax system really is heavily dependent on voluntary system. So if an individual or a business makes a deliberate decision not to comply, well, then this is basically the division that steps in to try to, fix that. They face possible civil audit or criminal investigation that could result in prosecution and jail time. And then they want to publicize those convictions because they want to provide a deterrent effect on those that might also be in that same arena of thinking they shouldn't have to comply. And that was what they're considering enhancing voluntary compliance. They are very special investigators. They're financial investigators. And in fact, in the overall, world of investigators in the law enforcement community, these guys have a very special role, because they have to wade through very complex computerized financial records and paper records, and they're trained to basically understand computer evidence and know forensic technology, how they recover encrypted or password protected data. But their conviction rate is one of the highest of all federal law enforcement. The courts will actually hand down prison sentences as well as fines and civil tax and penalties. So they have underneath them 3 interdependent programs. They have an arena that does legal source tax crimes, illegal source financial crimes. I mean, think of how they got the Capone, right? Is he was doing illegal activity and not reporting it on his taxes. It's kind of like, oh, that would fall within both of these, right? Narcotics-related or counterterrorism financial crimes. This is a big world that exists in the criminal investigations arena. It's not just, taxes per se, but each of these kind of dovetail one into another, in essence. You also have another arena that is the arena of appeals. Their job is they're supposed to be a separate agency. They're to be a place that's called administrative forum. So what does that mean? It is an administrative means of, okay, I am the taxpayer. I don't agree with this action. I don't agree with this tax, whatever that may be. It allows a taxpayer a voice, or somebody that's supposed to hear them, and they're supposed to be impartial, that they shouldn't be part of the same division of who it is that, let's say, if it's a audit, well, it shouldn't be part of that same division. It needs to be separate from them. They are to try to resolve tax controversies without litigation on a basis that's fair and impartial to both the government and the taxpayer. They have a couple little programs that live under their umbrella as well. So they have alternative dispute resolution. They provide technical guidance on international, and they even have a special little, which I found interesting, a division that deals just with art appraisals services. So what they try to do is try to reduce the length of the appeals process. Now, in the past, they used to do face-to-face conferences more, but even though that's still available, they try to encourage telephone or correspondence conferences now to try to shorten that overall time and reduce the taxpayer burden. So that's kind of within the world of the appeals area of the organization. Other principal offices, we have the Return Preparer Office. Now, this is kind of like dealing with us, right? Their job is to improve taxpayer compliance by providing oversight and support of the tax professional community. It's those of us that are the tax professionals. So here they want to promote qualified tax professional community. They want to improve compliance of returns by these preparers, and they want to kind of be that's if you look at the strategy or the goals of everything. They have a broad responsibility for the Return Preparer Initiative. So that's a newer thing where they're trying to do continuing education and testing, and they're trying to bring this within the IRS realm. But now we know there's recent court cases, so much of that initiative is voluntary right now, but we will see very soon, we've seen new legislation being introduced that it may become mandatory, but this is the office that has that responsibility, the Return Preparer Office, or we may see that RPO for the abbreviations. We have another one, Office of Professional Responsibility. This one maybe strikes a little more fear in our hearts as representatives. They have the goal of interpreting and applying standards of practice for tax professionals, and they're to do it fair and equitable. That's one of their missions or goals. But what are they going to do? They're going to ensure that tax practitioners, preparers, other third parties, that they follow these professional standards and follow the law. And in order to do that, they're going to increase awareness about Circular 230 and OPR, and they're going to make sure and try to fairly investigate and to take care of the enforcement aspect of Circular 230. Before they do sanctions, they're under the duty to try to do that process fairly. So this is the OPR, and that, they may want to go ahead and raise awareness out there in the tax professional community, but if there are bad players on our side of the field, the CPAs or the enrolled agents or attorneys or whoever, these guys have the job of trying to weed them out and make it better for all the players. We're almost to a little bit of a break. I'm going to go through one last little bit here as we have other types of offices, and this I'm going to touch on a little bit because maybe some of these are newer. You may not have heard of these before. The Communication Liaison, they have, they're kind of that, just think of focal point for communication. They provide communications in like the media, and they even produce video teletraining. They're trying to, for their own agents, these are the guys that reach 135 IRS offices nationwide, providing training, but they have an Office of Legislative Affairs. They have an Office of Communications, of course, but the Office of Legislative Affairs, they manage relationships with Congress because they have their own goals that they want to try to make sure are being protected. So they have an office that handles that. They have an Office of National Public Liaison. So they manage relationships out there. They have an Internal Revenue Service Advisory Council called IRSAC. So if you hear some of these, then now it's maybe connecting the dots here. They have a Information Reporting Program Advisory Council and other agencies, and they have interests in the administration and IRS activities and programs. And in fact, this office also manages the nationwide tax forum program. So if you've ever attended one of those, they have annual attendance of more than 18,000 tax practitioners. So that's another office that is called the CNL, or Communications and Liaison. That's their duties. There's also something called the Whistleblower Office. That was established by the Tax Relief and Healthcare Act of 2006. What this office does is it processes tips received by individuals who spot tax problems, and maybe in their workplace or just their day-to-day, business or wherever they encounter it, and they give an award worth between 15 and 30% of the proceeds the IRS collects if they go ahead and move on that information. And under law, these awards get paid when the amount identified by the whistleblower meets certain qualifications. So what are those? The amount identified by the whistleblower has to be more than $2 million. So this is just for really big fish, of course. And if the taxpayer has at least $200,000 in gross income, then they're going to give a portion of those proceeds to the whistleblower. So the whistleblower office has the duty to look at those tips coming in and then determine, how credible are they, and assign it out to the appropriate office for further investigation. So here's one other office that exists. They have a Privacy, Government, and Liaison on Disclosure. This one's kind of a newer one, the PGLD. They're supposed to try to enhance public confidence by watching the proper use of identity information. We call it PII often, means personally identifiable. We try that again. Personally identifiable information. So they're going to try to say, now in our newer technology, this is definitely a threat. So they have to increase awareness of criminal activities, promote data protection activities. This is all within this office. And watch systems used by other federal, state, or agencies and say, are you meeting the high standards of PII protection? So they are trying to, combat it. It's just a very big duty for sure. They also look at potentially dangerous taxpayers who should be approached with caution and put those notes out within their own divisions there. One of the very last little notes for you here before we take a quick break is we're going to look at some of the things that maybe this relates more to their own HR, but this is some of our last, if we look at the organization of the IRS or their organizational tree, they have an Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, or EDI. Their job is they want to try to promote a diverse workplace, but it's interesting what I found is they want to reflect the population they serve. So while they want diversity in their own workplace, they want to make sure that reflects the taxpayers they serve and try to serve all taxpayers' needs. So they have their own within that division: civil rights, diversity, inclusion, equal employment opportunities, disability office, but they also have the organizational support. So they provide budget administration, human resource, and data analysis and reporting. So all those lovely data charts I like to go to and study and try to figure out trending, this is under their umbrella or their arena, and that's kind of one of the functions of this particular office. So I know that's a ton of information we've gone through. We just kind of hit a lot of the organizational structure. We're going to spend most of the rest of the time talking about more important things, which I consider being the taxpayer rights and what our duties and obligations are.